Well, a man like this needs no great introduction. He's a great man. Dr. Thomas Sowell, how are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Well, you've updated your book, Intellectuals and Race, Part 3.
Mm-hmm.
This is a topic that really has consumed a lot of your time, and for good reason. Before we get into all this, what is an intellectual?
Well, it's someone whose final product is ideas. In other words, a chemist is not an intellectual because his final product is something that's tangible and, more importantly, something that you can verify. But with the pure intellectual, his output is ideas, and the only standard is whether other intellectuals take it seriously.
Now, are intellectuals smart? Are they dumb? Are they smarter than the average bear? What?
They can be any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So as I use the term, I don't. It's not an honorific term. It's an occupational description. Just as you say someone is a bicycle mechanic, then we know what he does. And if he's an intellectual, he produces ideas. It doesn't matter whether those ideas are rational, useful, or detrimental.
So a lot of very bad, and in fact, as you're right, a lot of very dangerous ideas can come from this class of citizen candidate, can't they?
Absolutely, and have done so for a very long time.
And that's what you spell out here in great detail. You know, that these intellectuals, they've been extremely genocide has resulted in many respects from certain types of intellectuals, right?
Absolutely. There was a 1916 bestseller by Madison Grant in the United States called The Passing of the Great Race. And this was translated into French, Norwegian, and German. And it was the German one that Hitler seized upon and called it his Bible. Madison Grant, I think, was fortunate in that he died in 1937. He did not live to see the ultimate consequences of what he had been saying.
And but there's a common thread with intellectuals of the totalitarian type, where left, right, whatever we want to call it. And they have this sort of, I'll use my word anywhere, there's sort of this utopian notion about a way a society is supposed to be structured. Am I right or wrong about that?
Absolutely, and I think what they want to do is to reduce things to some single overriding principle that they can then use to organize their thoughts as well as to organize society. So 100 years ago, what was ascendant among intellectuals on both sides of the Atlantic was the idea that there were inferior and superior races, and that you had to have eugenics and if necessary, various phasing out of whole races. And this was not a few cranks. I mean, John Maynard Keynes established the eugenics society at Cambridge University. And
of course, we know that Woodrow Wilson, an intellectual. What was he?
He was certainly an intellectual because he made his living out writing about ideas before he became president. Under Woodrow Wilson, there were government agencies where blacks and whites were worked together, and people under him segregated them. They began firing blacks from post offices in the South and downgrading the ones who stayed on with his approval. I think one thing sort of puts it in perspective. He had a private showing of the movie about the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, I forget the name too, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, and he invited dignitaries to the White House to see it with him, so he was all for this sort of stuff.
And yet he was a so-called great progressive, was he not?
Yes, but the progressives were the leading figures, as I go into in the book. They were the leading figures in promoting genetic determinism and in promoting eugenics. I mean, we're not talking about cranks on the fringes. We're talking about the president of Stanford University, the president of MIT, people of that sort.
And this is important to know why exactly.
I think, as with the liberals on the other end of the spectrum at the end of the 20th century, they had some one overriding factor to which they could attribute everything. and that became the basis of their theories. And that fact was genetic determinism in the early part of the century, and then it became racism in the later part. And if you questioned either of those things at either of those times, you were dismissed. You were not engaged as someone with a different point of view. I mean, it was just a dogma.
Well, what do you make of their progeny now, who kind of turn it around and they say, if you're a conservative or libertarian and you're advancing notions of individual sovereignty and state sovereignty, then you're going back to, and then you support the notions of John Calhoun, and I'm scratching my head saying, what are you talking about?
I know. Some of that is just simply tactical for political purposes. But I guess there are some people who are gullible enough that they really do believe it.
Mm-hmm. And do you connect the progressives and that intellectual movement with what's going on today among the liberals, or not really?
Not in the sense that the liberals today, of course, then would say that the reason there are differences between groups is that some groups are treated maliciously and so forth, whereas in those days they would have said it was all genetic. But the similarity is that both of them seem to want to seize one particular reason why the various groups have different achievements. And as you get into it, it turns out there are all sorts of reasons. One that I'd mentioned, for example, is that in some countries the average age is 20 years older than in another country. Mm-hmm. Well, those two groups of people could be identical in every way, the same language, the same race, the same culture. You go through the whole list, and yet you would not have equal achievements because one set of people have 20 years more experience than the other.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things you say about intellectuals is that you would expect them to use, their rational thought processes to unravel or to counter, mass emotional appeal, and yet you say they're in the vanguard of that appeal.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly those intellectuals who have degrees in soft subjects, which gives them a sense of entitlement, which their ability will not allow them to have, because they've studied things that are of no great value in the marketplace.
Can you hold on one more segment, please?
Absolutely.
I'm talking to the great Dr. Thomas Sowell. The book is Intellectuals and Race, Part 3. It is a terrific book, as you can tell. And I've got a bunch of more questions for him, including this issue of race that we use today to divide us. Where does that come from? I'll be right back.
Mark Levin, the conscience of conservatism. Call Mark now at 877-381-3811.
Well, not exactly. I'm talking to the conscience of conservatism. That would be Dr. Thomas Sowell. Intellectuals and Race, Part 3. This is an absolutely fascinating book, as were the other two. My question to you, Dr. Sowell, is this. You talk about intellectuals and their use of race and so forth. Apart from genocide and all the rest, today, aren't intellectuals in a way similar, the way they bandy this about and get people upset and try and create balkanization and so forth? Oh,
yes. I mean, that's been their role for a very long time. The basis of the balkanization now is racism, but 100 years ago it was genetics. But that is the role they've played.
When people lag behind, whether it's on tests or schooling or whatever it is, it's often said that this is due to past discrimination or race. What do you say to that?
All you have to do is look around the world, but of course people don't do much of that. Even in situations where there's some minority which has zero power of discriminating against anybody, it's very common for that minority to outperform the dominant majority. It could be the Chinese in Southeast Asia, the Lebanese in West Africa, the Jews in Eastern Europe, Britons in Argentina. You can run through the whole list. It's so common. Well, what's so frustrating, people assume that if different groups are not represented evenly in various activities or income levels or what have you, that there has to be that's an odd thing, and that there must be some sinister reason. When in fact, if you look at the history, what they think of as odd is what is pervasive around the world and has been pervasive for centuries. And yet if you ask them, show me one example of a society in which the various groups are evenly represented, they can't name any such society. There was a study of military forces by a professor back east, and she found that when you looked at multi-ethnic society, she couldn't find one anywhere in the world where the military represented the same ethnic makeup as the society itself. That is, in Tsarist Russia, for example, the Germans at one time were 40% of the top-ranking military officers. They were about 1% of the population of Tsarist Russia. In Malaysia, more recently, the Chinese minority supplied virtually half of all of the pilots in the Malaysian Air Force. I mean, you can just run through area after area and country after country, and you never find what is held up today as the norm, namely even representation.
You know, Joseph Schumpeter, he had great contempt, not for every intellectual, and he was one, you're one, but for intellectuals as a class. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of justification. Schumpeter not only had contempt for them, he also argued that they could be the downfall of our society. They would not be the proletariat, as Marx thought, who would rise up and destroy the society, but that the intellectuals would undermine all the values, beliefs, etc., that hold a society together. Somewhere Napoleon said something to the effect that if an empire is made of rock, intellectuals can reduce it to dust.
Yeah. Well, let me bring it up to current day and so forth. I mean, you're a widely read columnist. I read you all the time. Many people read you all the time. You have very compelling things to say, and yet they're always based in principle. What do you make of what's going on in this country today with this president and so forth?
Oh my gosh, that's an enormously depressing subject, because I don't think he cares what the facts are. I think, in a sense, he's perfectly suited for the generation that there is. In other words, people who will look only at the surface, or who will be moved by rhetoric, and who will not test what he says against anything. And he's content to win that constituency. I don't think he's the least bit embarrassed when he says things that he knows that any knowledgeable person will realize is totally false.
But he also, you explain this in your book, but he also tries to inflame, you know what bothers me? I'll be honest with you, Dr. Sowell. This country is such a magnificent place that people try to come in here, all colors, all religions, all sexes, all preferences. They try and come into this country, and then we have politicians who are constantly telling us how rotten we are, how racist we are. I mean, I think they thrive on turning us against each other when we are better than the politicians who rule this place.
That's true, and I think it's nowhere more so in this than in this administration. I feel so sorry for those people who had the illusion that Barack Obama was going to bring us all together. I mean, everything in his past life showed that he was a polarizer. He was not someone who brings people together. I mean, community organizers don't organize the community within itself. They organize people to envy and resent those who have more than they do, and find ways of taking it away from them.
The book is Intellectuals and Race, Part 3. Do we have it on my social sites, Mr. Producer? Up on my social sites, you can go look at it there and link to it. You can get it at Amazon.com, any reputable bookstore. I strongly encourage you to get it. Look, it's Thursday night. You can read it tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday. It's absolutely superb. You haven't really slowed down in terms of your research and your writing, have you?
No, I haven't, and a good part of that is my research assistants who haven't slowed down.
Mm-hmm. But you still have to put it all together.
Absolutely.
And you're going to keep up your column for as long as you can?
I expect to.
to. And you're going to continue to write books?
The books I'm not so sure about. I think I've written a few dozen so far, and if I haven't gotten my point across now, I begin to wonder.
I'll tell you what. When I was a lot younger, no offense, I used to watch Firing Line. I used to watch pay close attention to Milton Friedman and all.
Oh yeah.
When you were a guest, I'm going to tell you something. I'm telling you, when I was in my teens or so forth. So impressive. I have to ask you, I know the answer to this, but I want to ask you this question. When did you determine that you were a man of liberty? Like that these were your views and not other views?
I guess I thought that I was for liberty even back when I was a Marxist in my 20s. It's only when I began to realize that the left, one, was not going to promote the well-being of ordinary people, and that they had their own agenda which cut across that and often was very detrimental to it. That's when I began to turn against the left.
Were you a grad student, or did you read something in particular, or it just all came together?
No, actually, I was a Marxist when I went to the University of Chicago, and I was still a Marxist after I took Milton Friedman's course.
Really?
Yes, but my first professional job in economics was in the government. One summer in the government was enough to demolish.
Sorry, that's pretty funny. What? So all these years, man, being a Marxist, that's what we should do then. Where were you in the government?
I was at the U.S. Department of Labor.
Yes.
And I was terribly concerned about the question of whether minimum wage laws actually help poor people or just cost them their jobs. I wanted to find out some kind of empirical way you could go about it. To make a long story short, I thought of a way, and one day I came in and announced it to the office, and I waited for the applause, and I could see, shock on the face of the people, like this fool has stumbled into something that will ruin us all.
Well, now, that's interesting. So from there, what happened?
Well, once I realized that one of the reasons the government is not going to look out for people is the government is looking out for themselves. I was concerned with whether or not the minimum wage was causing people to lose their jobs. They were concerned because something like a third of their budget came from administering the minimum wage. And the questions I was raising were questions that they knew better than to raise themselves.
So maybe if we can get Barack Obama to get an internship at the Labor Department one summer, that might fix it, huh?
Oh, it has about as much chance as anything else.
You're a joy. And I cannot tell you, my audience, there are millions of us, we just admire you so. The book is Intellectuals and Race, Part 3. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to get a copy of this book. Go to Mark Levin Show Facebook, Mark Levin Show Twitter. Go directly to Amazon.com. Go to your bookstore. Just get it. Dr. Sowell, God bless you, my friend. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. What a great guy. Mr. Producer, just a great guy. And this poor man, he's come under attack. But it's very, very important that we talk to men and women of his generation who've been in these battles, and I mean they've been in these battles, and we continue to expose more and more people to them. Because this generation's going away. His generation. Which to me is very depressing. Anyway, there he is, the great Tom Sowell, Intellectuals and Race, Part 3. I want to strongly commend it to you and encourage you to get it. MarkLevinShow.com. No, check that. Mark Levin Show Facebook, Mark Levin Show Twitter. You can go directly to Amazon.com. That's a quick way to do it. Or go to your bookstore. Or if you're in your bookstore over the weekend, this is a perfect time to get it. He brings a lot of this information together.